welcome up our next speaker, which is Kristen Berman, who is going to tell us exactly the opposite of what everybody has been telling us for the past 2 days. Empathy, humanity, listen to your customers, understand what they're trying to tell you, use the data to listen. And Kristen is saying quite clearly, don't listen to your customers. Do this instead. So obviously, what is instead is going to be very exciting and very enlightening for everyone, correct?
I should hope so, yeah. A little contrarian point of view coming at you, so.
Oh, well, no, we in Pharma love contrarian point of view. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to disappear. You can feel free to share your screen and introduce yourself and take it away, Kristen.
Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to kick off with a study and then I'll introduce myself. So, and I think hopefully you can all see my screen. If not, Seth, you can yell at me. So I'm going to start off with one of my favorite studies. This is, you're looking at a graph about retirement savings. Don't worry, I know that I'm talking to healthcare, but will indulge me for a minute. And in this chart, you have about a little less than half of employees at one type of company who are saving for retirement. And at another type of company, you have over 90% of employees that are saving for retirement. And so the real question is, what is the difference between these two types of companies? And many times when looking at this chart, you can think to yourself, there's probably reasonable explanations for this. And some reasonable explanations could be income. People at company type 2 just make more money, so they are saving more. You could think education levels. You could think age. Maybe people, when they get closer to retirement, think more deeply about this and make retirement style decisions. But if you know the topic I'm about to talk about, or behavioral science in general, you may know that that's actually not the answer. That is none of the usual suspects. And instead, what it is automatic enrollment. So for people who are saving for retirement in this case, they were automatically enrolled into the plan. They didn't have to do anything and they started saving. And then the people on the left, you know, who comparably just won't have as much money in retirement, did the same thing. They didn't do anything and then they didn't start saving. So the employees are actually acting in the same way, but in one case they were enrolled by default, and in one case they had to take an action in order to enroll. And so this is basically the type of problem that I study. I'm a behavioral scientist, and I think about why people do the things that they do. And over the years, I've worked with, our team at Irrational has worked with tech companies like Google, Facebook, Uber, list goes on, lots of large health companies, and a handful of finance companies, from banks to fintechs. And we think about the difference between what people say they will do and what they actually do. And the reality in this problem is that when we ask people, why are you saving for retirement? They tell you really, really logical things. So around 80% of people who say, who you ask, why are you saving for retirement, and are saving, tell you, because I care about my future. It's an exceptionally logical answer. And the people who answer the question, why aren't you saving for retirement? Again, logical. They basically say things like, I can't afford to pay my rent. How are you even asking me to save for retirement? I'm offended, right? And so this is the type of discrepancy where the real reason that people are saving or not saving is because they were automatically enrolled into retirement savings. And yet less than 6% of people, when we asked that question, actually answered anything close to automatic savings or automatic enrollment or default or employer help me save, right? So we are completely unaware of the actual reasons for our behavior. And by the way, we picked retirement. We also did this with organ donation and other big decisions. Retirement is something we want people to think deeply about, right? This is kind of our long-term savings. This is not a small decision about kind of what type of tomatoes are you going to buy at the grocery store. This is one of the big ones. And so if we're unaware about the forces acting on our behavior, in this case, we should be a little suspect about this in general. And this is really behavioral science in general. This is the essence of what we're talking about, is that there's a difference between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do. So this heart of it is what the behavioral science field studies. And today I really want to share how we think about this problem, right? This is a problem not only for savings, but also for health. How do people think about their health decisions, and how do you, as somebody who's trying to build, solutions for them, whether it be drugs or digital platforms, how do we help them make better decisions that are in line with their intentions? And the big proposal that was alluded to is that I don't think, and research suggests that these aren't working for us, or they're not at least working hard enough for us. And I'll go over 3 different types of questions that we can answer, or the types of questions that are out there, and kind of what are the problems with these types of questions. And by the way, I think when I say they're not working hard enough for us, I'm really referring to, we don't have solutions in most domains that are like skyrocketing, helping us change our behavior. Like, it's been a pretty big fail from a tech perspective or from a new product perspective in our last generation to do it. Majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Our weight is not going down; it's going up. Obesity is becoming a bigger problem, and we're lonely. So happiness is not working out for us. And so the idea here is to really think deeply about how we're solving problems and what may actually be getting in our way. And then at the end, I'll propose, the process that behavioral scientists use in order to solve problems, and give you a couple examples. I always want to do a sound good, and I understand that you can't actually say sound good. So I hopefully at home you're nodding your head and saying, yes, Kristen, that sounds great. And through this journey, we're basically I'm proposing that the economics field has really been disrupted by behavioral economics. We kind of now know that people are not robots, and they don't act by time and utility preference. We have lots of other forces in our world acting on us, from social norms to loss aversion to endowment to optimism bias. All of these things are influencing our decisions. And really, this point of view is trying to get folks who are building solutions to kind of come along on that train, that our customers, our members are not rational, hyper-rational beings, that in fact there are all these other underlying motivations and forces acting on us, but we can't use the same tools and tricks that we've had to diagnose and understand them. We have to try new things. Okay, so I'm going to take 3 types of questions that organizations tend to ask customers and go through some of the problems that happen when you ask these types of questions. So let's just first take the past. So when we ask questions about the past, we're asking people to reflect on their past behavior. And we actually did a study, this was before COVID, where we asked, and typically if we were in a room together, I'd ask you to raise your hands if you forgot to wash your hands the last time you went to the bathroom. And typically when I did this again pre-COVID, think to yourself how many people raised their hand in this moment. Oh, maybe one person trying to be funny, right? In a public setting, it's very hard to kind of admit to these types of things. But even in a private setting, less than 1% of people admitted to not washing their hands the last time that they went to the bathroom. And you can imagine thinking about this with COVID too. If I asked you how many of you have washed your hands, the recommended 20 seconds or 25 seconds when the last time you went to the bathroom, think to yourself if you would raise your hand and say, actually, no, I did 10 seconds. It'd be probably very difficult for you to admit this to somebody else. And so this is basically the first reason why asking questions about people's past behavior is complex, is that we tend to give socially acceptable answers. So if I were to ask you, please tell me if you've texted and drive in the last month, most of you have by the data, and yet very few of you would admit to it. If you ask me, Kristen, do you eat chocolate before work? Of course I don't. Never. Sometimes. Very difficult for me to admit, socially undesirable things. And then the second reason that is just we forget, right? You've probably gone to the bathroom in the last year like 2,500 times. Very difficult for you to remember the 1,452nd time. And so when we're making these calculations and answering questions about our past behavior, there's a level of noise that is hard to get over because we're just humans and we forget. So that said, questions about the past actually are the least offensive, and there are small ways to make them better. If we ask people about their general health habits, difficult. Kristen, do you exercise? Of course, of course I exercise. Kristen, did you exercise yesterday? Well, not yesterday, right? So we can actually design these questions to be a little bit more accurate, to actually reflect behavior, but normally there's some margin of error that is very difficult. Okay, the second type of question I'll go over is questions about the future. So this is questions about what we think we will do in the future. And these questions are very important to designing programs, products, campaigns, things that you would do because you're putting a lot of money into a product or a program, and you want to figure out what people will actually do when they're asked about it, right? And so I'll give you two examples of problems here. One is if you think about a health system or a pharma company is thinking about helping people take their hypertension medication, right? It's very important to take this medication. The latest stats is if you are not taking it regularly, you have 3 times the likelihood of dying of a stroke. So very important. And so if you ask people then this question of saying, it's very important to take your medication, like it's very important, right? Otherwise bad things happen. Please tell me how much help you need. And of course, if people answer something like this, you would expect, this is important, you should expect them to tell the truth, right? And 58% of people say that they don't need any help in taking their medication. Now, you probably know that's just not true. 50% of people stop taking hypertension medication completely within the first year, right? So we do need help in this category. And yet, we don't realize that about ourselves. We're highly optimistic. One of the reasons that we're highly optimistic is because when we're being asked questions about ourselves, we're being asked to predict ourselves. And we're thinking about our ideal self in that situation. We're thinking about how we would behave when no other things are involved. You know, and we like to think, normally that's not how humans are. We have work stress. Maybe we are unhappy. Maybe there's a fire drill at work. There's lots of things going on. But when you're asking people questions about their future behavior, they're not thinking about those fire drills. They're thinking about how they would behave in the current moment. Second example here for this one is some work we did. We were asked by a large corporation in Los Angeles to help their employees eat a little bit healthier. And they had said, you know, we've already surveyed people and we want to bring free healthy food to our cafeterias. And so 60% of people said that they would take an apple if offered one. And so we put out free apples in our cafeteria. And they come to us very annoyed. They said, you know, it just didn't work. People did not take these free apples. What is going on? People say that they like the apple and they did not take it. So think to yourself kind of what could be going on? Well, we should observe. And so we flew down, we observed, this is pre-COVID, we observed the lunch hour in the cafeteria, and sure enough, nobody was taking an apple. And it was very obvious actually to us what was happening is that the apples were right next to the French fries. The real dilemma was that there were other things competing with the apple versus just, versus like people like apples, but do they actually like French fries a little bit more? And so when we're asked this type of question, we're thinking that people are without any other competing context or relative decisions. It may be that people like apples, but they like them cut up, right? We forget that the environment of decision-making is really important when we're making these types of decisions. And if these fries are smelling really lovely that day, we may just opt for the fries. But when we ask people these questions, it's hard to predict what they will do because they forget about the environment of decision-making. Okay, now, so we've done these two types of questions, the past and the future. Now let's think about the why. And the why is much more difficult than the past and the future questions to get actually correct. So the past questions, we said you can kind of correct for them with how you ask the questions. The future questions, you can still get people's attitudes and preferences here. We don't actually think it predicts behavior, right? But at least we know that people think that they don't need help taking their medication, or people think that they would take the apple. In the why questions, it's much, much more difficult. And a little bit of this goes back to the retirement question, where we ask people, why are you saving or not saving for retirement? And we really want them to say, or we think that they should be saying things like, I thought deeply about this and fill in the blank, I researched the index fund return, or I decided to make a trade-off and I'm not going to save this year, but I'll save next year. But in reality, this is kind of what they should be saying, right? Is that actually I'm just too lazy to uncheck a box. Right? Obviously, you sit someone down in an interview, nobody is ever going to say that, right? Nobody's actually ever going to say that. They also won't say, I just looked and did what other people were doing. But both of these are things that actually occur. It's not that people are too lazy, but we take the path of least resistance. We do the thing that's easiest. We're looking for heuristic. If it's a complex decision, we're looking around and saying, what should I do? What should I do? And, if doing nothing is the path of least resistance, maybe that's the right decision. And the real thing that we want them to say when we interview people or we ask them questions is that they don't know. Like, it's very difficult to know all the forces acting on us. So it's 100% reasonable that you wouldn't know that the retirement form that you had when you were first hired to the employer, automatically enrolled you into it's a completely reasonable thing not to know. And yet people, when you sit them down for interviews, very, very rarely say that they just don't know. And so in fact, we actually were like, well, actually, if people had answered that question about retirement savings and they weren't confident in their answer, like maybe they just didn't know, but they were asked, right? There was an interview bias and we're just asking them a question like, why are you saving for retirement? And they just check a box because they're being asked to check a box. Very reasonable. So we ask them, how confident are you in that answer? Like how much do you stand by it? Because if they don't stand by it, we don't have a problem, right? Because they're just kind of guessing, and that's okay. 70% were very to completely confident in their answers. And so this makes your job, our job, much more difficult, because we're asking people questions that they may not know the answers to, but they tell us that they're very confident. And so tough, right? If you ask somebody how they want to be helped and they say that they don't want to be helped and they're very confident in that, and yet most people by the data could use some help if they're giving up their medications. So we really want to think about this. This is a fairly large dilemma by which people are saying something about why they're acting, and it may not actually correlate to what's actually going on. I'll give you one more example about this, and then move on to the so what. So what do we do? And this is a lovely study, and this is probably maybe done kind of in the past, such that maybe a researcher wouldn't do this type of question now, but held up two pictures of women and said, which one do you find more attractive? And, this is a lab study, so people would come in and they'd sit down and say, which one do you find more attractive? And please pick one. And, you can imagine the participant saying, I find the white-haired person more attractive. And the researcher says, that's very great, wonderful. And he kind of like looks to the side, shuffles a little bit, and he says, great, tell me why you find this person more attractive. And he shows them the other person that they didn't pick. And in all reasonable worlds, you would basically expect the person to say, well, no, I didn't pick this. I didn't pick that person. But what actually happens is that for a majority of them, they go on to explain all the reasons why they thought that person was the most attractive. And so what this tells us is that we're very good at making up stories to rationalize our own behavior, right? We're very good at connecting the dots, storytelling, and rationalizing what we would do or not do. And the explanations they gave were very detailed, right? I really like their eyes. This is my type. Jonathan Haidt calls this the press secretary problem, which is, and by the way, this is before any political administration or anything, but it's the idea that you can stand up in front of a group and you have to explain somebody's behavior. And we are all of our own press secretaries. And if you ask me to explain my behavior, I will explain it. The question is this accurate or not? But I can't just stand up in front and say, I don't know. I must explain my behavior. And so this is, again, kind of this problem where we ask people why they're doing something and we can't say, I don't know. We're just good storytellers at telling kind of a narrative or a story that makes sense for our own, for our own press secretary needs. And so I'll pause here and basically say, this is, I think this is a problem and an opportunity. Some of the punchline of behavioral science is that the environment of decision-making really influences us. If I have M&Ms and they're close to me, I'll eat them. If they're moved farther away, I'll eat less of them. If you put a lid on, I'll eat less of them. If you take the lid off, I'll eat more. If other people are eating M&Ms, I'll eat more. If no one's eating them, I'll eat less. That's all about the environment that we live in. It's not at all about my attitudes, preferences, and beliefs for M&Ms. None of that has changed. Just the proximity or the or the other people or the norms have changed to drive my actual behavior. And you asking me why I'm eating M&Ms, I may not be able to understand that it's because of the proximity or it's because somebody else was eating them. And so it's a problem because I'm not able to articulate it, but it's an opportunity because we can design the environment to change. So with that, I'll go through this, and I have about 5 minutes left. So in the last 5 minutes, I'll basically talk through one example of how we can take some of these insights and move them into the design world, where we can say we're actually applying these insights from behavioral science to inform our design decisions. And the step we go through, it's a 3-step process. So I'll go through the 3 steps and then I'll give you the example. So the first step we call a behavioral diagnosis. And this is where we look at every single step somebody has to take to get to a key behavior. So we worked with a company called Livongo, which helps you get your diabetes management kit. And they walked through every single step somebody had to do in order to unbox and start using their glucose monitor. Turns out there's a lot of steps to do this. It's not just get the box. And once you write down all of those steps, all of a sudden it's very clear. I think in the last presentation, somebody said, make it easy. It's very clear that people would probably be less likely to do something if there are all those steps. But more than that, there are things affecting us at every single step of the way. And these can be optimism bias, cognitive overload, recency bias. All of these things affect our decision-making. And they affect it in a way that sometimes, is non-obvious to just asking people questions. So first we have to lay out the environment, and then we can identify what is the biases happening at every single step. And then we say, how would we mitigate or change that? And we do an experiment. And I know many times you can't experiment in the pharma world or in healthcare in general, but we can really design things where we're testing to see which version is going to likely work best. Launching and learning, I think many times people forget the learn. Or piloting, we forget that actually it's not just about piloting to de-risk customer support. It's about learning if something works and then how it works. So I'll give you a quick example, another from the financial domain. I find that giving kind of examples outside of one's current domain can kind of get people to think deeply about a topic since it's not as in-house to your own. And this is from student loans, by which COVID has made this less of a problem, but they were really crushing American students for a while there. And yet there are $2 million in financial aid that goes unclaimed. So kind of curious, right? $2 million of free financial aid from the government, people aren't taking. And researchers did something where they gave people information about the financial aid. They said, here's eligibility, here's how you apply. And the idea here is that, people may not know. They may not know their treatment plan. They may not know that they could call their doctor to change drugs if something's not going right. They may not know these types of things. And so obviously giving people information could help. And the reality in behavioral science, and a sad punchline, is that information typically doesn't change behavior. And that's a sad punchline because it would be so easy if it did. It'd be so easy if you could just tell me, oh, Kristen, there's 150 calories in the muffin, and then I know that, and now I don't eat the muffin. Turns out that, again, if the muffin's close to me, I'll eat it, versus if it's far, if it's cheap, expensive, knowing the amount of calories in it, interesting, but just not going to get me to trade down many times. And we have the same thing with in the health and the finance domains, where giving people information is nice. It just doesn't bridge the gap between getting someone to actually do a thing, right? Imagine I tell everybody about home delivery. Does that mean that they'll actually do it? Obviously not. There are multiple steps in order to sign up for home delivery that would get in that way. And so what we did is what we do for most things is we do a behavioral diagnosis. We go through every single step that you take to get to a key behavior. And we found in this process, obviously, it's very difficult. There are 20 plus steps, and we're being generous in order to get to this key behavior. And then we identified the biases that are at play. And And the biases here was cognitive overload at the very beginning of the process. So just the decision to apply or not apply was getting in people's way. They're procrastinating it and then missing the deadline, right? And you can probably relate this to some health problems by which the decision to get treatment or not is a big decision. Yes, treatment's hard, but that decision up front is pretty intense. And so there's cognitive overload to make it. And again, what happens in health is you just delay and maybe delay until it gets too bad. And so our hypothesis was we wanted to remove the cognitive overload, remove the decision blockers. And so we designed a very simple text message campaign that said, the financial aid is now a part of your enrollment process. So instead of a decision process, yes or no, it was more of a continue mentality. It's something it's implicit norms as well. It's something everybody's doing. By the way, this is West Texas University. 80% of students qualified for aid. Financial dropouts. The number one reason for dropouts is financial issues. And so it was really about having people really think that this is not a decision. This is just part of the process. And it worked. So we increased the odds of people applying on time for financial aid by 3. And if this was scaled to the US, this type of intervention for the students that we pushed it out to, it would be about 230,000 more applications a year, just from understanding basically this small insight about the cognitive overload that comes at the very beginning of a process. So the idea here is that this is the behavioral design method by which we look at the environment of decision making. We identify the underlying motivations of psychology that are pushing someone to act or not act, and then we test. And the testing doesn't get enough love because it's the idea that we have an intuition about something, we're looking at data, we're creating a hypothesis, we're looking at kind of what, by the way, we do a lot of literature reviews to figure out kind of what else has been tried before to create these hypotheses. We do our pre-testing, we do pre-research. I can talk more about that in some Q&A. And the experiment really says, does it work? And we're very rigorous about measuring if it works or not. The main takeaway here, I think, from this whole talk is just trust what I do and not what I say. And so we want to look at what customers are doing, potential members are doing, versus kind of what maybe they're saying. And at the end, I just added this slide of we have this is a field of study, right? It's a way of thinking, and so our team has a boot camp. The number one FAQ I usually get is, how do I learn more about this? Kristen, your contrarian point of view is strong. I need more information. So I have a discount code for, I think we put that at 10% for this team. Only give this because this is a question we normally get. And I will come back and quit sharing. Great. Oh, actually, Seth, I can't hear you. You're muted.
No, there you go. Wow. I think I speak for everyone in asking you this question.
Yes.
What in the heck are we supposed to do now?
I mean, the opportunity is great. If you think about, even if we just take how do people take their medication, and we try to map out every single step someone would need to do to take their medication, or maybe we take somebody who has medication with really bad side effects, and they tend to stop taking it because of these side effects. We could ask them questions about it, and I think we would get someplace. I'm not saying this is never something you should do, but I think the better place to start is mapping the actual behaviors that would happen for them, and then figuring out how to intervene.
Gotcha. So again, looking at what they do rather than what they say. Can you comment on the intersection of behavioral science and pharmaceutical marketing to HCPs, especially those marketing messages based on science, clinical trial data? So we go out to HCPs and we are always touting, this data point or this increase or this decrease, etc. And, how does that jive with behavioral science? Because these are facts.
When you say this increase or that increase, can you give me an example?
Well, you say like, oh, this, our medicine is proven to reduce cholesterol by 27%, or, we increase your A1C by 14%, or things like that. So these are fact-based clinical claims. and then you have the behavioral science part of it. So
yeah, if I were trying to market a drug, I would make it significantly easier for doctors to prescribe it. I would think about all the paperwork that they have to do, and then hire interns to do the paperwork for them. People aren't doing things, especially new drugs. New drugs, they have to figure it out. They have to take actions. And so I think you can use information like reduces X and increases Y and stuff. But information by itself, I think, doesn't help the doctor hang out with their children at night. They're just busy. You're making them busier. They're people too. And so I would think more about the frictions. And then second, would think about other motivators. The UK had a really nice study by which you give people social proof. You say most doctors are not prescribing as many antibiotics as you. In fact, you're in the lowest or you're in the highest. And this is an incredibly effective way to get doctors to prescribe less antibiotics.
Gotcha.
So I would think more cleverly about the types of interventions or approaches to these doctors, assuming that they're irrational and choice. The number of choices they have will keep them doing nothing. So that's another consideration.
Very, very interesting.